Great. Well, it's been a couple of weeks coming for this. Got a lot of requests. Everyone's been really keen to hear what you have to say, Andrew. So you should feel very humbled by this. But basically for today, part of the series that FlyFreely is doing is that the most questions we hear from other commercial drone pilots in the industry is what are other people doing in their industry? So everyone wants to hear about how other people are tackling these challenges. It's still a relatively new sphere for a lot of worlds, particularly the mining world. So we're very lucky today. Andrew, one of our clients here at FlyFreely, has built an incredible drone program. You see on the screen there, 300 pilots across 34 sites, and he's had a lot of really great lessons. And I think from what he has to say and his experience, he's got a lot to share. And I think from the questions we receive over the last couple of years, I think would hopefully answer a lot of these and get people started on their journey. So without further ado, I'll embarrass him and put his photo up on the screen and introducing Andrew. So thanks so much, mate, for joining in. We've also got as well Dave Cole, our founder and CEO of FlyFreely, who's been along with Andrew this journey. So I'll throw it to you, mate. Tell us a bit about yourself, your professional background, and why you're crazy enough to get so deep into drones.
Well, the drone side of it actually harks back to my earlier interests as a young teen. At the age of 14, I was flying gliders. I was an air lead cadet. Started there as a 12-year-old, and by that time, I had my heart set on going down the commercial side of flying, or military flying at one stage. Got classes. That didn't happen. Went into civil aviation. 1989. This is where everyone looks at work and says, "Why do I have such a strange-looking ARN?" I got my commercial license in 1989. Worked with air traffic services as well as an air traffic trainee. Then aviation went very quiet. Eventually, I ended up back into the IT world. Thought, why not? We'll try this newfangled IT thing. This is prior to the internet. Went into there. Worked 30 years in IT at various government agencies, local government, and eventually found my way into the mining sphere. Getting into the drone side of it, then a little idea that was started by my colleague, who was our first REPL and our first chief pilot. We started our little project that was, because we'd like to try this newfangled thing about these drone things. We'll see if, what could we do with them in mining, in our job. So it started out as a pet project, and sure enough, my colleague said, "Well, if you want to get involved with this, it's pretty good fun. It's something different and everything else. You should go and get your drone license." Well, lo and behold, having a commercial pilot's license also was rather helpful. So managed to join the drone program, and we started it out at Sutherland, and the rest is history. Fantastic. And that's how we ended up. That's how we ended up in the drone program. It was by fate more than anything else.
all good things are. Awesome. And I was going to say, that probably leads pretty well into the next question there on the screen. So sort of going from using it as a pet project, now it's off into the Glencore drone program. Can you tell us a bit about sort of where it started and what's it look like today? What's been that sort of journey step by step?
It's been a fairly long journey, actually. It did start out as a small side project under the tutelage of some of the people that are online today. May know a gentleman by the name of Mr. Don Cameron. Is now a bit of a legend in the drone side of things. And Don and I have been friends for a long time. We work as colleagues in various areas. In 2014, we thought, well, maybe we could try this drone idea. We started flying. The first drone we had was a good old Phantom 3, the latest and greatest technology. Then we decided to experiment with something a little bit bigger and actually got ourselves a Vulcan drone. And this is, it was a bit of a learn as you go. There wasn't the major rules we had back then. It was still pretty much cutting edge. And we also had involvement with some universities also, and that was looking at applications for drones in things like stockpile management. One of the first projects where we did proved our worth with the drone was actually in that photo. There is one of our large conveyors, and it has large stabling cables to reinforcing. It has these large bolts that need inspection. Well, previously we would normally shut down an entire conveyor for 3 days, put up scaffold, put up EWPs. we were asked, what do you think? Do you think you could try it with a drone? So out we went with the Phantom 3, did all our, no one else had done that kind of thing before. And we used the Phantom 3 and we had the whole job done in 27 minutes, what normally take 3 days to do. So
Very good.
suddenly everyone started to take a little bit of interest that maybe these drone things could be a good idea. And of course, there was a lot of other little pockets within Glencore, other sites that were all starting to do it. The surveyors were starting to certainly embrace drones.
Mm.
Then it came about a meeting in 2015 from our hierarchy, met with Don Cameron, and he was crowned our first chief remote pilot and told, you are now the to lead this project. So Don started that project back then. It was to, give the blueprint on how we should start our operations and what we needed to do. And Don was pretty much promoted on that day, and away we went. How does it look today? It's a lot larger than what it was. Initially, it was only our coal program side of commodities that were using the drones then. Now it encompasses all of Glencore Australia's operations, including copper, nickel, zinc, and including our agricultural arm at Calinta that deal with cattle.
Awesome.
So that's where we're at with that.
And so, Andrew, can you give us a bit of a sense of, what is it, for those that may not know, what is a chief remote pilot? What are their responsibilities and what they're in charge of?
What's the job of the chief remote pilot? Funny enough, it was actually during, we've been recently a part of a Glencore-wide thing. We were having our aviation audits, and we were being audited by one of the aviation auditors. And he succinctly explained it, the chief remote pilot, you are the go-between between the company and the Civil Aviation Safety Authority. My job is a statutory role. I'm responsible to ensure all of our pilots are trained to a standard. They follow the rules and regulations that have been set down by CASA. So there's a lot of that day-to-day work. It's flight approvals. It's ensuring our drones are fully operational to ensure that they're ready to go at a moment's notice. And of course, with 34 sites that I do cover, I do have a little bit of help. I've actually got senior remote pilots on all of my sites. I also look at new technologies coming in and gauge where it's going to go for us. The other side of it is I tend to stay away from more of the payload side of things, like whether it would be cameras, sensors, and everything else. I have an appreciation of them, but my role is to work out the best fit of drone solution that could do the job for us. So that is my day-to-day role. Basically, if it's got wings and rotors and someone wants to talk to me about it, that I'm the person they see.
You're the person responsible. And so you quickly mentioned there, so the chief remote pilot at the top like yourself, and then is it sort of the senior remote pilots you said across the
underneath
sites?
there?
Is that how it's sort of run across the 34 sites?
That's how it is run. Yeah, each site runs semi-autonomously. They each operate in their own small silo, but they've got that overarching what would you call it? Me being able to see over the top to give them an idea about where they should be going and what the procedures are. So the procedures are all the same across the board, but how they run them and who runs them, they run separate to those. So so it's like a bit of an overwatch over the top. The guys on the ground handle the day-to-day operations, ensuring who's flying those days and everything else. If there's a question and query or they need some assistance, that's where I step in and help them to make sure they can do their operations.
Fantastic.
Sorry, I'll just quickly jump in and just ask the audience. If you've got any questions, feel free to start asking them as we go, and then towards the end we'll actually respond to them. And yeah, just to give you a heads up. Another question for you, Andrew. You mentioned just before, there was that meeting where Don engaged senior management, and senior management said, "Go for it," and then that created this dedicated role. How important is it to have a dedicated person focused on this? And then two, for those that are struggling out there to get that support, any tips or suggestions for them to try and build that high level support so they can take it to the next level?
I think we were very fortunate. We did have some very enlightened leadership that did say, look, it's a really big project. There is no doubt. It is also We're fairly fortunate, having come from the mining world, where a lot of our regulations and safety and everything else is very similar and parallel to what it is in aviation. So in our case, it made sense. There was no point in having everything distributed everywhere and everyone having multiple leaders everywhere. We needed that one focus point. And when it comes to having to deal with CASA, dealing with the RPAS industry and everything else, it's good having that single point of contact and having someone that can look after that problem. I don't necessarily look at survey issues with the drone. I won't be looking at whether they're looking at an engineering issue with the drone. I'm looking at making sure the drones are flown safely and that they can do the task at hand and do the mission. So it's sort of that separation that you do need. And that's how we've pretty much managed it. And that's how the company saw it too, is to have that single person at the top level. Made it a lot easier. There's always the big question, especially the larger the organisation you are, is, well, who do we see? Who do we know? Who's the subject matter expert? Well, in this case, it's the chief remote pilot. That's who you see. It simplifies things, especially the larger the organisation you are.
Absolutely. And Dave, you said I saw a question come through. Do you want to hold that off to the end? Do you want to wait?
Yeah, we can hold that one off until the end.
Okay. Awesome. We'll keep going through, and yeah, like I said, put any questions through if we jump past anything you guys want to hear. Great. So next question. So what has been the biggest lessons learned along the way? And I'm sure there's been many, but obviously from start, that's probably the biggest one. I think a lot of people, at least from my reflection, like we meet a lot of teams that some are very, very early on, they've just stopped outsourcing, they're moving into their own process. And I think it's a pretty common question of like, what roadblocks, what red flags, what are the big scary things that we sort of need to be thinking about when people start their journey?
I was going to say, you tend to say you learn from your mistakes, and gee, we learned a lot. We certainly did. Some of the biggest lessons is the cultural change as well. Let's be honest. You can pick up a drone at JB Hi-Fi, Harvey Norman, and everything else. So there is that perception still, even in some areas of management, that it's a drone. It's just a toy. It's certainly not the same value of a multi-million-dollar piece of mining equipment. Yet it does value add to the company. And when it's not there, it's not adding value to the company. In some cases, it can create great difficulty that these drones are out there, they're doing their jobs and everything else. And when they're not there being able to do the job, there's that bit of a reliance upon them. So the cultural change is the biggest change of the lot. And that's also coming back to even the pilots. I think I have the biggest thing I've said to the pilots when I first took on the role was, as far as I'm concerned, if you are a surveyor, if you're an environmental staff, if you're an asset manager, or you're in production, while you're flying a drone, you are a drone pilot, and that's first and foremost. That's how you should be thinking. Your role as a surveyor or your other role that you do work as a secondary role as part of the task. And that was a bit of a shift for a lot of our staff that were taking up into the drone world, because initially 50%, 60% of our pilots were surveyors.
You're right. And also with that, like I know with the 300 pilots, the 34 sites, and you often share with us how you sort of go to a new site, train them up there, keep it monitoring, get the senior pilots in. I guess logistically speaking, if you were to do that again, what are some things you might change, or at least make it a bit smoother?
Well, I think the one is to definitely probably have a more use of things like Teams and things like that. That was a big issue for us. But also for me, there is a lot of the time that you do have to be on site, and I think the one thing is to trust your crews and your pilots to go out and do the task at question. Make them feel that you're approachable too, that you're not. I think the big issue is there's always that fear, if I crash the drone, I'm going to be in trouble and everything else. Mistakes happen. Drones crash. It happens. Bad weather. It happens. The main thing is to not have that blame culture, unless of course it's something that they have done something incredibly stupid. But you don't want the blame culture. What you want is the learning culture, that, okay, a mistake was made. We try to send that issue out to as many of our pilots as well, that we can avoid that in the future. Learn by your mistakes. It's the big adage we have.
Awesome. And one other one there too. I know we spoke a couple of weeks ago, and you mentioned was sort of a couple of hours to get teams, sort of different sites up and running, and then you've got it down to a couple of minutes. That might be an exaggeration, but you sort of cut that time down hugely.
We did actually. Going to the FlyFreely implementation, it started initially at, I think we took 6 months, I think, to do our first site. And that was learning. For us, it was a very big, steep learning curve. It was learning to use the system, and my pilots had to learn how to use the system. And of course, by that stage, we realised we have so many sites, we're not going to be able to go out to each site, babysit. And so the mistakes that we did learn in that initial rollout, we applied, okay, well, is there a better way we can do that? And that was, we took that back, wrote out our plan and said, well, this worked, this went really well, but there is a better way we can do things. And thus we started using, for example, the tools of, having our the other capacity of the FlyFreely program was to run dummy missions with dummy drones and everything else, and they could actually go through the whole process. And then it was to use teams, and I was actually eventually doing one-on-ones. So we used the practice area pretty much as like a sandbox that they could play and make the mistakes and learn how to work it. Then I'd come over the top, and then we'd learn best practice for that and work out the way we should be doing it. And you also get feedback from your own pilots too, that they think, well, maybe there's a better way we can do this. Can it do this? And we took on that feedback too, and that's helped a hell of a lot too to make more of a success. And once you start doing that, it becomes very intuitive too. So
awesome.
It's made our life a lot easier. So now my trips to site are really just the consolidation side of it, and just to go and see how they are using it, and just pick up if there's any small issues that they've got. And correct those, and maybe bring ideas that have come from other sites and see what they think as well.
Absolutely. I think seeking feedback, and then I think any technology over implementation across any sort of mine sites, always a cultural change management is always the biggest piece. So that's super interesting hearing the feedback.
I think I was fairly lucky, having come from an IT background where small steps make smaller disasters.
Yeah. I'm gonna write that down. Awesome. So, and I guess for the other one was, so for others in the similar position, we sort of touched on a few pieces there. Kicking off you're sort of saying seek advice from people, have a hierarchy from the chief remote pilot downwards. Was there anything else on there? I've got a question on a dot point, but were there any other big pieces of advice for people starting this journey, or maybe partway through it?
Really, what you've got to look at this with your drone program is, and you've got to really look at it from CASA's perspective as well, and that is, we're an airline. We don't have an Airways Operator Certificate, but we have a REOC we operate under. Our pilots don't have commercial pilot's licenses, they have REPLs or sub 2 kilo. You're required to do maintenance, you're required to log your flights. As far as we're concerned, treat it like an airline, run it like an airline. The patterns there, it's been done before, and it works. So that's my advice on that. And you can scale that too. If you've got 5 drones, 2 drones, 300 drones, it didn't make any difference to you if you're just using the exact same systems.
Absolutely. And I'll switch over to you, Dave. I think this is one of your questions you're interested to unpack.
Yeah, and I think one of the really interesting things Glencore does is, they operate a lot of sub 2 kilo drones, but they actually don't operate them exclusively under the excluded category rules. They still apply the REOC rules. So yeah, I thought it'd be interesting because it's a question we get asked a lot. What do we do? Do we split the fleet? Do we run it all under REOC? So yeah, love Andrew to talk on that topic, the pros and cons of doing that.
Yep. Look, we were very fortunate. Don was a bit of a visionary, because at the time we did operate one very large drone and a couple of smaller ones, and it didn't make sense to have 2 separate systems for when they're all still going to be under the same rules and regulations for us. So it was decided we'd operate our RPAS, all of our RPAS, sub 2 kilo and REPLs under the same REOC. The reasoning behind that was we didn't want to create 2 separate systems and manage 2 separate systems. It's hard enough as it is to try and manage one system across a large area. The bonus is too that our sub 2 kilo pilots are restricted to only operations over our ground space. So they're inside their own little sandbox to play. They are basically, they're really just a flying GoPro if you really look at it. They're smaller drones. You don't really want them to, the roles they're doing, the tasks they're doing don't require them to hold an REPL per se. They're not flying a large multi-rotor. They're not flying longer ranges. The other thing is too, is that we also have a fairly extensive sub 2 kilo training program that's done internally with another third-party provider providing that the theory training, and we go out and are cleared to do our own assessments. So we assess our own pilots, and it's very handy because it creates that these sub 2 kilo drones are just really small tools in their armory, whether it be an enviro, whether it be an asset manager, whether it be a manager who wants to go and have a look at part of a site where there's been an issue and he just needs to get a drone up in the air, run it 100 meters away. It's easier and faster for them to do that, and they've been signed off as we require under our coal rules, that under our mining rules, that you can't operate any other equipment unless you've been signed off and proven to be competent. So we had that own internal system done for us. The other beauty of it is too, is that because the sub 2 kilo pilots are under the same system as our REPLs, once they start getting that sub 2 kilo experience, it's a little bit easier to transition them to become REPLs later on. They've already got that flying experience. They've already flown under the same system. For them, it's all the only difference is now different rules, larger drones, a few more capabilities, and that transition's a lot easier than say coming up from, I've been a surveyor for 20 years and I'm now having to fly an M300 and I've got 5 hours on the sticks. But some of these guys have now got 50, 60, 70 hours flying sub 2 kilo drones, the sub 2 kilo on site. It's a fairly easy transition for them to go to an M300 or something larger.
Yeah, awesome. So more sort of flexibility. You don't have to sort of wait. They can jump between different jobs if they're across it all. Fantastic. Keep going on. Jump to the next one. So we got what's the biggest focus for the next 12 months? I usually ask this question 1 to 3 years, but that's too crazy right now. So I think for the next 12 months we spoke a little bit about what you guys are prioritizing, or what are you most excited for is another way I should frame it, of where are you thinking of taking the drone program next?
For us at the moment, it's going to be a lot of consolidation. The first plan was going back to the FlyFreely aspect of it. The first plan was to roll it out, get it to sites, get the pilots to use it. The next stage is going to be consolidating it. It's going to be rolling in the maintenance side of it, rolling in some of the training schedules, making more use of it now, getting some hard and fast data out of it to show what our operations are doing. And that's already starting to happen. So, and I've also got another aspect of taking on our farming community that we have under our arm to introduce them to the FlyFreely program. So that's going to be something, so it's out of scope. It's not part of the mining side of things. And of course, the other one, definitely BVLOS. I've actually got our first pilots that are going through their IREX for RPAS at the moment, waiting to do their exams. So we already do have BVLOS 1 signed on to go and do that. So we're going to start making some more use of that. And of course, now with the changes that have coming in with what we've been using now, everyone under the same system, is a massive rewrite of our operations manuals. Our manuals and that were all approved previously were, of course, for an age 5 years ago, 6 years ago. So they're going to need a massive revamp. And we just found a better way of doing things, and we're coming in with a lot more knowledge than what we had previously. So there's a bit of work there with CASA in working together with them to ensure that we've got those down pat for ourselves. Awesome.
I'll keep going the next one, looking at time. We're doing pretty well so far. So the I'll say a shameless sales plug, but I guess up there from sort of your side of things, of how FlyFreely sort of helped along that way. You mentioned it's been part of the scaling process, but I guess why did you sort of choose to go this direction, and how was it used before FlyFreely, and I guess what's changed after you've implemented it?
Prior to FlyFreely, where do we say? you can imagine 34 sites doing 34 different things. And it was a case of, it wasn't a failing of the earlier system. It was a case that the system grew faster than, well, the implementation of RPAS in the company grew faster than what the system could hold that capacity. We did have the initial core was actually an in-house developed SharePoint system that we were using. It had certainly outgrown, the system had outgrown itself. We did look at maybe revamping in that rather than going off the shelf. Some sites did do their own thing and had their own little smaller systems in place. And of course, there was lots of some sites that were also using copious amounts of paper and to do them. And heaven forbid, there was one or two sites that weren't doing anything at all, that sort of escaped the net that we had. So when Don did decide to change over and had gone into to retire, I took on the role for 12 months prior. And first thing I did realize was, if someone asked me the question of what's going on this site and everything else, or can we get information about this other site, it was going to be awfully hard to do so. I would have to have gone through 34 different systems to get that information out. Being asked, how many flights do we do per month? I couldn't honestly tell you that that's exactly how many we were doing. It was a rough guess. So it was a biblical system. Seek and ye shall find was the only way we could do it. Now with the system that we looked at, we did look at a plethora of other systems in place. What we were looking for was a system that could be flexible. We are a large organisation, but we still wanted to have the ability for our sites to have that little bit of individuality as well, and to manage their own little operation, but with that larger oversight from the CRP above. So you're all following the same rules, following the same hymn book, but you're still managing your own little areas. So that takes the pressure off me. I just make sure that they are doing it. FlyFreely was one of the few options that allowed us to do that. That's why we did do it. So the big kicker was, having that fear of, someone's going to start asking for lots of information and being able to get that information in a timely fashion. And how we're using it today, it's nearly rolled out to all of our sites. I've got one or two sites to complete. I just did a rollout to our site in Western Australia recently, and it went very successfully. My pilots now also have one of the great godsends for us was having the chief remote pilot tools. I think the guys there have pretty much, it was like the holy grail for us, because it was having the ability to approve flights on a mobile phone. And coming from a system that was sitting on an old SharePoint system that required me to have my own PC logged into our network to ensure it happened, that made it rather difficult. My senior remote pilots can now also use that tool, so that's made life a lot easier. Awesome. Having the ability to have your JSAs and your flight planning and everything else now on a mobile phone, and of course you can realise that some of our mines are not in the most places where there's great vast amounts of telecommunications on them. Having that offline capability too has been very, very handy for our guys. So we're actually getting quality of information now and quality of our logging.
Awesome. Sorry, good. Sorry, I interrupted. I was going to say, I think our product team always quotes you as saying we need to thank Andrew for that bit of functionality. So I think he's got you on the wall for our product team. So
I think it was more of a case I was annoying them a lot too, and I think my senior pilots were also annoying them quite a lot. So which is good. That's that's been a bonus, and I know. look, every product has pitfalls, has everything else, and look, is FlyFreely perfect? There's always work to be done, but it does the job that we require it to do, and it does it very, very well. So, end of story as far as I'm concerned. It's an excellent tool.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for that feedback.
Shameless plugging.
Shameless sales plug case study on that one.
Well, put it this way, my stress levels are way down when it comes to the administration side of things now.
Done. There you go. That sounds good. Also, and I think the other ones were some of the questions we've got, and I think from the feedback from those who've registered, I can probably, cautious of time, we can combine both of these to a single question. But I guess looking towards the future, so we've done the past, how it's been set up. What are some of the current trends that you're sort of seeing, particularly maybe drones in mining specifically, but maybe drones in general, that you think we need to be more cautious of or paying closer attention to? And then part of that is, I think one of the caveats of that is a lot of the drone in the box stuff is coming forward. So yeah, we'd love to get your thoughts on what's happening in that space for you.
Look, drone in a box is a look. Having come from the IT world and everything else, and pre-internet and everything else too, there's always lots of wonderful ideas coming in, and you know, great technology and everything else. But it's a matter of finding a use for it. And I think it's taking that step back and saying, well, okay, yeah, look, the technology is great. It looks like a great system, but how's it actually going to work for us? And that's what we're at the moment. We're saying, well, where does this fit into our strategy? What can we see it doing? Drone in a box is a great idea for, especially with regard to in some more remote areas, having our guys being able to, if we don't have staff on site, or they might be busy with other things, yeah, I think maybe that'd be a very good option for us to look at, and that's something we are starting to do. I think what you're also going to see is probably a more formalized training regime towards RPAS now, as they are becoming more sophisticated, as we are moving more to BVLOS. I think you might find there's going to be a little bit more on the training side of things, and recency, which we're going to see as well, falling more into line with what crewed aviation is. As it is now that we've a lot of our pilots, for example, hold multi roles. They are surveyors, they are environmental managers, they are whatever. But there is only one full-time RPAS pilot, being myself. So that's probably going to be a bit of a change in future too. And it's not necessarily the RPAS themselves that are changing. It's a bit like computing. They still do the same job. It's still the same tool. They may be doing it faster. I think what we've got to look at is the technology surrounding the RPAS, whether it be new hydrogen fuel cells, whether it's going to be better batteries, safer batteries that could provide greater endurance for us, smaller systems, smaller, more efficient sensors that we're going to fit onto them. What payloads are we going to bolt onto them? Are we going to be requiring bigger drones for some things? Cargo drones is something that we're certainly having an idea at and looking at for some of the smaller items that we tend to use over some of the larger distances. And I think if you look at the growth of RPAS at the moment, I think we've got more REOCs out there than we do have airways operating certificates at the moment. I think it was about 250 extra above and beyond that's in CASA. So it's only going to get bigger, but I think it's going to start to consolidate. The things that will change is the surrounding technologies, the telecommunications, the types of payloads we're getting. Are they going to be smaller drones? Are they going to be bigger drones? I think the example was the old Phantom was replaced in the DJI fleet with a smaller drone. That does happen too. Are we going to look at micro drones, something even smaller that's going to be used to get great endurance?
Absolutely. No, some great points there. And I think we've got about 10 more allotted minutes left. And I know there's a bunch of questions coming in. So I might, if you don't mind.
Yeah, we'll take some questions.
Yeah, go for it, Dave.
Awesome. So the first one we'll kick off with is one from Clint. Question around rolling over your historical data. And I guess it's a broader question of, you cut over to a system like FlyFreely. What do you do with your historical records? How do you handle that transition?
I'm fairly lucky. Being part of a very large multinational, I've got a very, very good IT and IS team that can handle that for me. They will be looking at archiving that off for me. The paper records, of course, they're pretty much to site, and they just follow the standard as they do for the normal Records Act that they would do. We did do a historical transfer for some of our data that did come in, especially our flying hours, I think, Dave, when we did our conversion over to our sites for our drones. So yeah, it is. I think in most cases it's going to be whatever it is under your local Records Act that you have to follow, and that's what we've been doing. So, but yeah, look, if they're electronic records, it was easier just to archive them, get someone to do the job for us, and that's what we've done.
Awesome. Got another question on regards to flight logging from Garen. Really, probably getting into the weeds a bit, but understanding how the team actually captures their flight logs, gets them into FlyFreely, and this probably comes to a bit of a broader question, which we really didn't discuss, is the fleet and how that changes with different drones in the fleet.
Yep, we do have a big mix of fleets. So we've got substantially a lot of them are the DJI series drones. We also have Wingtra and we have Trinity, and we're looking at introducing some newer ones later down the future that we'll have a look at later on. The beauty of it is the system. I've left that up to my sites. My argument is I want the logs on there from the drone. The product allows many ways of doing that. Some of my guys are quite happy to download them straight from the console. Others are quite happy to use the FlyFreely app that's on the console that's been installed. Others are quite happy to use the DJI Cloud and let it auto synchronize.
Yep.
We've documented all those processes, and I let the guys on site determine how they do that and what's efficient and what's easier for them and suits their operation. So it gives them that flexibility to do it. The end line of oversight is you must have your log on there before it will be finalised, and that's how we run those. So I've deferred to my senior remote pilots to determine the best for their sites.
Awesome. Got one.
That's probably the hard part is there are so many ways to do it that there is no best way.
Exactly, and then depending on the make and model of the drone, then you're limited in certain ways and others. So yes, It gets quite complex. I've got another question from Craig. This might be a little bit specific, but do you, in terms of the team, are they doing structural inspections, and do you have any insights into sort of how effective or those inspections have been?
Some of my sites have done them. Again, being such a diverse company that we are, some sites have brought in third parties to do them. It depends on the situation. I know the guys that were doing one of my nearby sites here, they were doing roof inspections and reconstruction. It was fairly effective for them. They didn't have to have people on a roof. It worked for them. The guys that are doing patrols over conveyors, looking for thermal hotspots, issues there. Previously, they were walking up and down conveyors. Now they're flying a drone over it. It's been a lot more efficient, a lot faster for them. They can pinpoint things quicker. So the asset side of it depends again on the site. Depends on the resources that are available at the site and how they want to do it. And I've left that pretty much up to their devices to determine which way they want to jump with this. The good news about it is once one site does it, the other sites tend to communicate it out to each other. So it tends to follow through and flow on.
Excellent. Got a bit of a recurring theme here with this question. I guess it's just about, does Glencore use external contractors, and B, if you do use those contractors, do they fall under your procedures, and how does that work?
That's actually a very, very good question. It gets even raised from my own sites when they contact me. We are we do have contractors that sometimes fill full-time employee positions. So, for example, we might have a surveyor that comes from a contracting company who's going to fill a position that we've decided to fill with a contractor as opposed to a full-time position for whatever reason. They haven't been able to fill the full-time position. If that pilot has if that surveyor or that staffy that we're contracting has an REPL, we induct them into our system and they fall under our REOC. If they're flying our RPAS, they fall under our REOC and our rules. If it's a third party and they're operating under their own REOC, I trust that they will be. We do our checks and balances on them, and they fly under their REOC.
Yep.
That's their responsibility. And what we do is if it's I think I can use a very good example recently of we're in some specialised RPAS, especially for our agricultural type things where we're doing spraying or where we're doing reseeding, for example. We're unlikely to hold large agricultural drones in our fleet. Those guys come in, they liaise with our local senior remote pilots, so we have traffic separation, and for information purposes, we'll have knowledge of their flights, so we know what's going on, so everyone knows what's happening, and they fly under their REOC straight away. It falls under their system, and yeah, you've got to have a bit of a trust into the system. We are looking at, because Glencore is a signatory to the BARS program with the Flight Safety Foundation, is that eventually we'll be looking at our RPAS operators will have to hold the BARS for RPAS accreditation as well.
Oh, what a great segue, because there's a question about bars. So yeah, it was, you know,
I didn't know it. I
about,
didn't even know that question.
Yeah. You know, dealing with the compliance side of bars, I guess. Also, you know, your hat, you know, being part of you know, a key representative on the committees within bars for RPAS. And you know, yeah, where do you see all that going, and yeah, into the future?
Well, look, it's already within Glencore Australia. The requirement is to have BARS accreditation for our crewed aviation. We are looking at the next stage within the next 18 to 24 months to have that also for our RPAS community. So if you have your BARS accreditation, definitely do it. Just as a sideline too, that once I've got my FlyFreely rolled out and all of my sites are on there, and I'm quite happy with it, we'll also be going for BARS accreditation to basically be audited under the BARS system to make sure we are fully functioning, we're capable of doing what we're doing. And it'll be a good reflection on to gauge how well our operations are and how efficient we are being. So yeah, so if any operators out there are a bit worried about having to do a BARS accreditation and do the audit, it's okay. We're going to be doing it too, so we'll feel your pain as well. It's nothing to be feared. It is it's that check and balance to have that feeling that you are doing things right. And I think it's not a thing to be feared or worried about to have to do it. You know, put it this way, I think you'd rather have scrutiny from the Flight Safety Foundation, the BARS program, than you would from a CASA inspector.
Yeah, for sure. I'm not sure how we're going for time there, Alex.
So we've got time for one more question. I had one from one of the registrants, but I'm cautious. I want to give it to the live. Yeah.
Yeah, we still got a bunch more, but I just don't think we're going to get to them, unfortunately.
Awesome. If any of the ones, maybe we can follow them up after this if we run out of time. But we got time, Andrew, for one more. Is that all right?
Yeah, no, I'm good.
Yeah,
I'm good.
We got one more. Dave, you want to give one of the live ones through?
Oh, I thought you said you had one.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So we got probably for that one there. So one of the registrants who signed up said, "What's Glencore's future plans for drones in terms of mine rehabilitation?"
That's a very, very good question, actually. I have some of my pilots are the environmental staff. The rehab side of it was the last 3 years. I've actually trained more of our environmental staff than I have surveyors. Especially for one of our larger projects out at Newlands, which is undergoing heavy rehab at the moment for the next 7 years at least. And we've had our RPAS operations at Liddell and Mount Owen, and at our former mine at Balbone and West Wallsend. We've been doing it for quite a while. A lot of them are doing standard survey work, standard photography work, and now we're introducing multispectral capability where we're actually engaging the amount of rehab that's being done versus how much weed infestation, what's happening there, and doing those kind of controls. So it's if anything, it's probably going to be something that's going to be a lot more of, as opposed to production in time, as the changing situation of the industry happens. So so that is a definite big one that my guys have been out there doing the work. In fact, I've got some flight checks to do soon about that. So
fantastic. Awesome. we'll follow up any I'll do the questions with Dave, and any ones we've missed, we might chase up to make sure everyone gets heard.
Yeah, we'll follow up. There's a few there we can respond to post. So you will get an answer.
You will get an answer, definitely.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Andrew.
Hopefully with a coherent answer and a useful answer for you too. That'd be preferably.
We'll do our best. Awesome. Well, thanks again, mate. Really appreciate your time. I know you're a busy man, so hopefully a lot of those people on the call got a lot out of it. So thanks so much for your time. And yeah, anyone has any questions about today, feel free. There's that last slide that we'll send out the recording after this. But if you have any questions, send us an email and we can chase up with Andrew and the team.
Yeah, and also
go, Dave.
Oh, sorry. Before Andrew finishes, I'll just say any other topics people are interested in, keen on, please drop us a line, let us know, and we'll try and do that in the future. But final words to you, Andrew.
Yeah, look, a big thank you to everyone for listening in. When I was asked and approached to do it, yes, I did have absolute fear and panic. Thank you to everyone that did dial in. It is appreciated, thank you, and makes it that maybe I am doing a good enough job. Sometimes you do second guess yourself doing this role. So, and thank you for making it very, very less painful than what it could have been.
Yeah, no, we like it nice and relaxed.
Absolutely.
Don't worry.
Glad to hear. Well, thanks so much, mate. And yeah, we'll catch up very soon.